Hey guys, so today I'm going to be talking about some of my favorite YA fantasy books that I recommend you read. I have read quite a few of these a while ago, so some of these have never even made it on my channel, but I really need to start talking about books that I read before BookTube and start doing recommendation videos. There are so many books that I feel like I either read, you hear about in a wrap up, and then you never hear again. But I love them and would recommend them, and I should talk about them more often, so that's what we're going to do. I thought we'd start off with YA fantasy because I think that's the genre I've read the most of. The first book I want to talk about is by a favourite author of mine who you would know one of my faves, if not my fave. This book of his is like never talked about and it breaks my heart a little, and that is The Arithmetist by Brandon Sanderson. This was actually my first book of his that I read and I loved it. I really also recommend if you are someone who is intimidated by his books, because a lot of his adult fantasy books are quite large and can feel like quite a commitment and a little bit overwhelming. I highly recommend that you start here. I think this is such a good introduction because it shows you how creative he is with his magic systems and his worlds. This book takes place at a school where these kids learn magic by drawing chalk. So they draw chalk on the ground and it's like these little like chalk people like pop up and they can like do things. It's really interesting, really kind of quirky and fun. What I also love about this though is the main character in this doesn't have the abilities to be able to bring the chalks to life kind of thing. I really enjoyed having this main character that didn't have powers, and he felt in some ways like a sidekick, because then the main girl character, who still is the secondary character, like it's very clear that this other guy is the protagonist, but she was the one with the abilities, and it was really cool when they teamed up that he was more of the sidekick and then she was the one actually doing the work. I really liked that dynamic. It was very different because you always have the protagonist in the center with all the abilities, being able to do everything. It was a refreshing different stance on things. I loved the school setting. I love school settings in general, but this one in particular was fun. There's also a little bit of a mystery happening because a lot of the students, I can't remember if they're disappearing or they're being murdered, but that's the main plot, and that's something that the main character goes on a kind of quest to figure out what's going on with this book as well. Yes, there's like these little drawings, you see them, to explain how things work. I definitely don't think this is Brandon Sanderson's best, especially if you've read his other books. You will know how extraordinarily capable he is with his creation of fantasy worlds. I still think this is fantastic and you should read it and enjoy it. And yeah, if you're looking to get into his works but you're intimidated, I recommend picking this up because I think you'll get a really good idea of how creative he is and how fun his stories can be. This is at the moment a standalone. He has said that he was going to continue on and write more books in the series, but if he doesn't, don't worry, it does read like a standalone. Like there is definitely more room for him to develop this world and the story, but it definitely has a closed ending in this book, so it's still satisfying. Please check it out, and if you do, you have to let me know. Next book's been on my channel, but it hasn't been on my channel at all this year. It was on last year, and that is The Last Magician by Lisa Maxwell. I adored this. I think I read this last year for a readathon. I can't remember, but it was so good. We follow this girl who's from modern day New York. She has this ability that allows her to travel back in time, but she gets stuck in like the early 1900s, I think. Yeah, she's actually also a thief, so before she got stuck in time, she was working as a thief and she'd go back in time and steal things. In this world, a lot of people have magic, and those with magical abilities are called, the magic is called affinity, I'm pretty sure. Those who have an affinity, yeah. So she gets stuck back in 1902, and while she's there, she's trying to go after the old item that she is thieving for. She also gets to know other people there who also have an affinity, and it kind of just goes from there. I just love the setting of this. I really love the characters. I really love how Lisa Maxwell writes characters. She writes ones that I just immediately just want to read their story. Like that's the only way I can describe it. So we have people with all different kinds of magic. This is set in old New York. There's a lot of like secret societies. It's just such a fun time. The last book was supposed to come out this year and it got pushed back to next year, which breaks my heart a little bit because I need to know how this ends, but I just love it. So please, if you're interested in this, give it a go. I also really loved how the time travel was done in this, I will say that. The next book is no stranger to my channel, and that is The Bone Witch by Rin Echo. I think this is my favorite Rin Echo. I've read quite a few of her books. I just haven't read her first books, which is The Girl from the Well or something. I will read them. I'll probably read them in October, but this I just adore. This book follows Tia, and Tia, when she's about 12 years old, her brother dies. Her brother was at war, and then at her brother's funeral, she accidentally brings him back from the dead and discovers that she is a bone witch, which is essentially a necromancer. She is then thrust into kind of court life and training to be able to be a bone witch. Bone witches are really rare in this world, but they are also really feared and in some places outcasted. A really interesting mix of her being like really powerful, but then also really feared and judged, and it's kind of all about that. There's so many things I love about this. One of my favorite things is when Tia brings her brother back from the dead, he becomes her familiar, so they're kind of linked. They're not linked so strongly that they can talk to each other mind to mind, but they can get a sense of one another and know when when the other's in danger and such, and every now and then they will get like snippets of images of what the other is up to. I just adore their relationship. The other thing I really like about this is it's mostly told linear narrative, but then every now and then we get these chapters where it's older Tia, where she's retelling her story of how she discovered she's a bone witch and her training and her upbringing to this bard. And you don't know what's happened, but you know older Tia has been exiled and is potentially a villain, but you don't know what happened. So it's so cool. The romance in the series is one of my favorites. I just thought it was so well done. Like, it doesn't really happen in this book, it happens in the next book, and you get a hint of it at the very end of this book, and it's just so good. I just adore it. I think the way it is written and the way it's told, and there's just so many elements of the story I love. Rincha Peko is just so amazing with her world building. It's so complex and layered. I just love how much thought has gone into the creation of the magic in this world. It's really cool. I just want more people to read it because it's so good. So please give it a go. I then had to recommend A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Bridget Kemmerer. This is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, but our Beauty is from our world. She's a modern day girl and she does have cerebral palsy. It's about this beast who is cursed and he has to try and make someone to fall in love with him. Obviously, this is the original fairy tale. I'm just retelling it. But yeah, the beast has to make someone fall in love with him within 3 months, which is the end of summer. So what happens is his bodyguard, Grey, goes into our world and collects young girls and takes them back for the prince so that he can try and make them fall in love with him. But he slowly turns into a monster, and then at the end of the 3-month period, if the girl has not fallen in love with him, which hasn't happened at the start of this book, then time is reset and then Rin and his guard have to go out and get another girl. So they're stuck in this cycle, and Harper is the latest girl, I guess. I don't want to say too much. I really love the characters in this. That's what really makes it. It's a very kind of slow story as well. Like, it was just, I don't know, it was one of those books that's just like a nice ride. Like, it wasn't hugely action packed, but I just had a really good time reading it. Something else I really loved about it was how the original Beauty and the Beast is very focused on how the curse just affected the prince and the people in the palace, whereas this book looks at how the curse affected the kingdom and what's happening to the kingdom overall. And a lot of what's going on in this book is how the prince is trying to help the kingdom, I guess. They get a lot more involved, which I really enjoyed. I will say I didn't love the second book as much. I kind of wish this was a standalone, but I still really recommend it. It's a really fun series and I am excited to see how the final book wraps everything up. This next book I'm pretty sure has never featured on my channel, and that is The Assassin's Curse. This is part of a duology. The second book is called The Pirate's Wish, and I really enjoyed this duology. It's nothing spectacular. It's a very character-focused story. So we follow in this story an assassin and a pirate. It starts off with these two characters meeting, and they accidentally are bound together by a curse. And it's their adventure to go off and kind of undo themselves of this curse, and along the way they do get to know each other and fall in love. It's a very light story. Like, it's not really in depth with the world and everything else going on in the world, but I really enjoyed following these two characters' stories. So at the start of it, the assassin is actually sent to kill the pirate, but then because they are bound together, he can't kill her, and then they have to go off on this quest, a long one, and journey to get rid of the curse that's binded them together. And he can't kill her because then he will kill himself, if I didn't make that clear. It was fun. I just had a lot of fun. It wasn't anything like groundbreaking, but I definitely want to reread this, like especially maybe for a readathon. I think it would be really good because it's a short book. I know this edition is out of print, but I believe you can get a bind-up of the two books in one. I think a huge reason why I probably love this is I love travel books. Like, I love traveling fantasy books where they adventure to all these like different lands and different climate. To me, that's just fantasy and that's what I love, and I think that's why I really adored this. And I really enjoyed these two characters and their relationship. But yeah, I just highly recommend if you want like a quick fun YA fantasy read. But I know there's like a sequel duology or maybe trilogy, but I haven't picked it up yet. I really need to do that because I loved this so much. So I might reread this and then get to the other one. Okay, the next book I want to talk about is Dance of Thieves by Mary E. Pearson. The second book was my favorite in this duology, which is called Vow of Thieves, but I still really enjoyed this first one and recommend the duology overall. This book follows Jace and Cassie, and Cassie has been sent to Jace's kind of area of the world because she is part of the Queen's Guard, and the Queen has sent her so that she can catch this criminal that they believe is hiding out in Jace's territory, which is kind of like this outlaw kind of area of the world. The rest of the kingdoms are all like reunited, but this place doesn't have a recognized king or leadership. However, Jace's family, the Bellingers, are the rulers, and Jace is set to be the next ruler. Now these two meet, they kind of have an instant beef and don't like each other. Immediately after that, they are both kidnapped by these slave traders. They very quickly get away from the slave traders, but they are stuck in the middle of the desert and have to kind of travel together, and while they're traveling together they have their legs chained together, so they are literally stuck together and have to help each other survive. So that was just such a fun dynamic from the get-go. They do end up getting back to civilization, and Jace's family, and it ends up kind of being a lot about the politics, particularly like what Cassie's goal is for her queen, and then like Jace's goal, and there's a lot of like confrontation and difference there. It's just so good. Like the characters make the story. There's basically, I don't think, like any magic in this first book. There's a little bit in the second from what I can remember, but it's very much a like political character focused fantasy setting. It's just so good. I love Jace's family. They are like this mafia family. The whole reason why I'm now obsessed with mafia books and want to read every single one I could possibly find out there. I really love Cassie as a character as well. She's someone who grew up as an orphan on the streets, and she has a lot of childhood trauma, and I liked seeing her character develop and having to still deal with things that long ago happened. There's just so many great relationships. Jace and his family, and then Cassie and her other guards, who are basically her family because she's grown up with them. And then obviously this whole dynamic between Cassie and Jace is just fan-friggin-tastic. Now this book is the sequel duology, the first book in the sequel duology to the Remnant Chronicles. You don't have to have read the Remnant Chronicles to read this, but I still highly recommend the Remnant Chronicles. But this book I think will be easier to get into. Yeah, it's so good. Highly recommend. The last book I want to recommend and talk about is the first book in a trilogy. I binge read this trilogy, and it's not the most well-written trilogy or structured trilogy, but it's like the perfect guilty pleasure YA read, and that is Touch of Power by Maria V. Snyder. This cover, gross! Let's not even talk about it. It's shocking. I don't think they sell this anymore, but I'll put a picture on the screen of like the new covers because they're a lot nicer than this. The reason I love this book is, if you don't know, I love reading about healers. I think eventually I'm gonna have to do a recommendation video on books, fantasy books that have healers, because I have so many. This one will be in it. This is one of my favorites. Now this book follows a girl who has the ability to heal others by touching them, but what I loved about her healing ability and what's unique to this story is that when she touches them and she heals them, she gets the wound in return. So if you have a stab wound in your stomach and she touches you, she will heal your wound but then receive the wound in return. It was just such an interesting dynamic to go around. This is also quite heavy in the romance, but I really loved it. There's this complication with who she is, and she has to hide her identity because healers are also being responsible for the spread of plague that has taken over the world and killed a lot. So she is also a wanted criminal basically because of her healing abilities. So it's something she has to hide and something that she has to be on the run for because people can't find out. It was just so good. This is just so good. Like, it was just like such a addictive read. I actually really want to reread this and read more of Maria V. Snyder's books. I think I've read one other like standalone, but I really want to read like the what is it, the Poison Studies. I've heard really good things about that, and she also has like a new release that I'm very intrigued in. She's just a really fun, like just like such a fun YA fantasy author. I think she always has like really interesting dynamics when it comes to like the magical abilities, like with the healing here. It was so fascinating to read about. This is also like the perfect pick-me-up kind of book for if you're feeling slumpy, because it's just like so fun. It's just fun, you know what I mean? And that's what you want in your YA fantasies, according to me. So there you have it. Those are there's seven YA fantasy books that I highly recommend. I'm gonna do more of these videos because I've read so many more YA fantasy books that I do also recommend. But let me know some of your favorites. Let me know if you've read any of these and what you thought of them, or if you plan to pick any of them up now because I recommend them. And I hope that you're enjoying whatever you're currently reading, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!